Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of the Royal Blue podcast. As you probably be able to see there, I'm being joined by a very special guest today, Mr. Henry Winter, one of the most prominent football journalists in the country. And Henry's previously been with the Independent, Daily Telegraph, and the Times, amongst other numerous football titles over the year. Now does his own The Winter View podcast. Very glad you're able to join us today, Henry.
Pleasure, Chris. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, as I've outlined to Henry already, it's all going to be about his Goodison Park memories. Everton's home since 1892, the first purpose-built football ground in the country, and of course, only the 5 games left as we speak before Everton moved to that new 52,888 capacity stadium on the Mersey waterfront. But Henry's been there for many of those memorable matches in recent decades over his illustrious career, covering the game. Just briefly before we start, Henry, obviously people be aware that you've been working with one of the great Goodison Park icons in recent times, Duncan Ferguson, with his autobiography. I mean, that must have been an interesting experience and quite illuminating when it comes to the passion of Goodison Park.
Well, absolutely. I understood Everton a lot more having spent some time with Duncan Ferguson. I mean, he's a remarkable individual. I don't need to tell you that, but as a man as well as a footballer, he's got many layers. I think he's a better footballer than people gave him credit for. I mean, that was his left foot was fantastic. He wasn't simply just a battering ram in the air. He was good on the ground as well. And as an individual, I mean, there's, there are lots of stories in the book, put it that way.
Yeah, terrific. So obviously one for all Evertonians and football fans in general to look out for there. But with as we said, today's topic is all about Goodison Park and Henry's memories of that. I know you've selected some of your favourite or most memorable matches that you've attended at the ground, Henry. But if I can take you back to the beginning, did you actually remember going to Goodison Park the first time, or the first time you're aware of it at all? Because I know obviously famous managers like Arsene Wenger, Alex Ferguson have spoken about the fact that they believe it's one of the most intimidating grounds to go to as an opponent.
Well, it is. I don't think there's any dispute of that. I've spoken to opposition players when they've come out almost sort of shell-shocked and their head's still ringing and their senses scrambled, having been in front of Gladys Street, which I have to say, it took me a couple of years to learn the spelling of in the mid 80s when I first started covering matches. I just think that it's one of those special places, and I understand the sadness of moving. I mean, I'm a big fan of Bramley-Moore Dock. I've been around it a couple of times, a couple of years ago, even before that, even before they started opening up, and it is fantastic. And the most important thing about it is that huge new stand, the main stand, is the rake of it is fantastic, because that's what kills new stadiums if they're too shallow. Whereas this will have a ravine type feel to it. And look, ultimately, it's flesh and blood and lungs and hearts that make football grounds special. And Gladys Street, I can just see it just marching there en masse and just making that into an instant success as a new stadium. But it will be difficult leaving your ancient home. I mean, it is like physically leaving your childhood home, your family home. You've got so many memories wrapped up in there. Wherever you look, there's sort of history seeping from the walls, standing outside and seeing the murals, walking around. And I've been there on non-match days and, covering pieces with the incredible community department operation you've got, which is sort of scattered in buildings sort of around the place. I don't need to tell you that. And there's just there's a feel to it, there's a sense to it. And I always think the great homes of English, British, world football, they just have a resonance on non-match days. You can just you just feel something there. So yeah, it's a special place. And I'm not an Everton fan. I mean, I grew up in London, and I feel, an attachment to it and a sadness that it's going, and an understanding. So heaven knows what the hundreds of thousands, millions of Everton fans around the world think of stepping away from the spiritual home.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, though, Henry, in terms of the design of the new stadium, hopefully that will help Everton, because it's been a long time coming, but hopefully Everton can learn of perhaps the mistakes of the past in terms of new stadium. You've mentioned that this is hopefully an opportunity for them to bring the best elements of Goodison Park without having any of the bad elements, which we all know are the numerous pillars and poor facilities.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear sort of journalists complaining about the pillars in the way of the press box, I think, wow, so we've got a free seat, we've got a free pie, and we've got free Wi-Fi. We're very, very lucky to be here. And that absolutely particularly highlighted for me when I went to a couple of games in lockdown at Goodison Park, and I had to sort of go and check. And I actually looked at, June 2020. I mean, the fact that it was in June, sort of high ass. It was a game behind closed doors. It was 0-0. I went and checked on the gate, and it just said nil, the attendance in Soccer Base or wherever it was. And I just thought, wow, I mean, that is just, and even when you go back to Goodison nowadays, you can still see one or two little things just reminding you of that, sort of 5 years ago of the pandemic. So yeah, it's about the people, but you're right, there was something about the sort of structure of it, the closeness to the pitch, the fact that, you talk to opposing wingers, they said they couldn't just not only hear the Everton fans, they could feel the sort of, the breath on their neck. And
Right.
it's probably one of the reasons why some of your wingers down the years have been so good. I think of Pat Nevin and Kanchelskis and individuals like that. I just think that, you've got an absolute, it is special. And as you say, the new place, Bramley or Dock, it's, the key thing there is to get a huge win early, a real statement performance, maybe someone flying into a tackle, just a great last minute goal. And I think that would, a Tarkovsky type moment,
Yes.
that kind of sets the tone and accelerates the bedding in process. It's like moving into a new house and you're looking around and you think, right, I'm just going to have an amazing party here. And then you wake up the next morning, and you got friends scattered all around the house. You think, wow, that was a party. I really am in this new house. You kind of need a night like that at the new place. And that will absolutely come because, you've got good players. You've got it, you're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, and where you think of where Everton could have been, both physically and metaphorically, in terms of there was the previous Riverside development at King's Dock a couple of decades ago. Peter Johnson before that had unspecified locations for a giant bowl, which would have been the biggest in the Premier League at the time, or even the more controversial destination Kirby, going beyond the city boundaries. And then you've obviously seen in recent seasons with Everton at the time when the new stadium's being erected on the waterfront, that Everton's entire Premier League status has been in jeopardy. It's kind of like Everton have had a bit of a rough ride to get in and a long journey, but there's light at the end of the tunnel now.
Yeah, I mean, two things on that. First, I think you'll find, and certainly found it at West Ham when they moved from the bowling ground to Stratford, that a lot of the fans just stuck to their old routines and went to their old pubs around Upton Park, and then and they got Ubers or walked or whatever to Stratford. So I think there might be an element of that, and it's only about a mile and a half to 2 miles away between the two, and it's downhill, and you'll be able to sit. But it's funny. You talked about the importance of the sort of the off-field issues, and I can remember that final game of the 22-23 season. Sean Dyche 1-0 against Bournemouth, and I was at that game, and you had to stay up and. Excuse me. I actually dug out the program, and it had Dwight McNeil on the cover, and he was talking. Obviously, done an interview with the club, and he was talking about, this is, I'm honoured to play for Everton Football Club, and we the players will do everything we can to fight for to give Evertonians what they deserve, i.e. a team that's proud to wear the shirt, a team that's in the Premier League, and you've got a remarkable longevity of run in the elite division. And of course, Dwight McNeil was proven right. You did stay up. It was Decore scored, and that was huge. But Sean Dyche, who I know, I think he came out, you would have been there. He came out afterwards and said, we cannot go through this again. We have to sort the off-field thing off. So you look at that, that's less than 2 years ago. And you just think of the new mood around the club now.
Yeah, and in terms of those changes, like you said, in terms of Goodison Park for a long a long time of Everton's history at Goodison Park. It was the elite club ground in the country. Obviously, the 1966 World Cup finals. It was hosting group games with Brazil, went to the semi-final. But it's not been that. It's clearly not been that in the Premier League era, and that has corresponded with the longest trophyless drought in Everton's entire history. I guess those two things can't be coincidental. It was mentioned in the points deduction case that Goodison Park is now in the bottom three grounds in the Premier League for match day revenue in terms of generating that. So it as much as Evertonians would be sad to move and emotional about it, and the time is long overdue, really.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is difficult to move, but you have to move with the times. And I think the fact that the new stadium has already been included, I think ahead of Anfield, you'll be able to correct me, for the 2028.
Yeah, you are correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge feather in the cap of the club, and you look at clubs nowadays, and I look at the modern stadiums that are being built, and obviously they're there for football, but they're also there for concerts. And you look at the way my kids tell me this, the way the music scene has developed, that bands aren't making money from albums as we would call them, or from streaming. They're making money from gigs. So the future in this country is very much bands touring, because they need to, for the money, and for that they need the biggest venues that they can get, and that will be your new stadium.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the games itself, Henry, I mean, where do you want to start with your list?
Oh, I mean, well, I'll go back to Graham Poll. We should start with Graham Poll.
Okay.
Bring flashbacks to a few. I mean, it was 2000, and Graham Poll, I think it was a derby match, and I think Sander Westerveld tried to clear the ball in the last couple of minutes. It cannoned off the back of Don Hutchison, was going over the line, at which point Graham Poll blew his whistle. And then there was a debate there. I think there was about 15 seconds to go, and should it have been allowed? And it wasn't allowed. I think it was, just checking my notes, it was 0-0 in the end.
Yeah.
And I remember I was at that one. I was thinking, what am I going to write about? It's 0-0. And then I thought, oh, Don Hutchison scored off his back. And then we had all the sort of Graham Poll sort of palaver as well. So, I mean, absolutely, definitely that one. I mean, the night Big Duncan left, I mean, he wasn't playing that night, but there was what it's like. You sometimes get a sense, even if you don't know completely, something is happening elsewhere in the building. You just get a sense there's a buzz, or with, the very well connected local journalists, like yourself, or former colleagues of mine, like sort of Paul Joyce and Chris Bascom. There's there's almost like a sort of silence or busyness around them. You just know something's going on. And that was one of those nights. So yeah, I mean, that was against Newcastle, wasn't it? You won 1-0.
Yeah, who he was being sold to, yeah.
Who he was being sold to. And I mean, I always liked the old entrance to the press room at Goodison Park, because you used to wander up the stairs. I mean, you could take the lift, you used to wander up the stairs, which went past the boardroom. And I always liked that walk up there, because you could have a little chat with Bill Kenwright, who would tell you the latest shows to go and watch in the West End, and why Seamus Coleman should be a latter-day saint. So I like that, but that was there was very much that sense around it that night. I mean, that was just an extraordinary night. And I think when Duncan Ferguson actually drove away that night, or he was driven away in his car, the Everton fans were chasing him down the road saying, please stay. So that story spread like wildfire. And that was 98. And you can only imagine how much quicker it will be now in the age of social media.
Of course, yeah. I mean, incredible rates. Like for, I suppose, our younger viewers and listeners, it'd be a different world. The fact that it wasn't that instant information age. And in terms of the Graham Poll one, like you say, that was before my journalism career. I was in the Gladys Street myself for that one, probably berating him for that decision. It's incredible, really. Obviously, the Merseyside derby will always throw up controversial incidents, whether you're viewing the game in a blue prism, a red prism, or a neutral's point of view. And we take that right through, as you mentioned already, the James Tarkowski derby this season. It will always be thus in that respect.
Yeah, I remember having a chat with Roy Hodgson, who I've got to know well down the years, and that game in October 2010, the start of Roy's reign at Liverpool, and he'd lost at Goodison Park. I think Cahill and Arteta scored. You'd correct me on that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
and I remember having that sort of briefing upstairs, and then bumping into Roy on the way down. I think he'd been into the boardroom, and just having a chat with him, and he said, why is everyone getting a little bit upset? Because he felt that the angle, not so much the angle, but the tenor, the tone of the questioning was very critical towards him. And I was going, well, you just lost the derby. You're Liverpool manager. You've only just come in. There's a few doubts about you and your purchases anyway. And he just didn't get it. And I've spoken to him a couple of times since, and I think he does understand it now. Because, he's been in Milan. I mean, he's sort of, when he was at Inter, he understands the concept of the derby. But I do remember that thinking, Rory, and I really like Rory. But that was a 2-0. That was a painful loss to him. And obviously for Liverpool. But those derbies are just astonishing. I mean, just sitting, I'm quite pleased that when I was at the Telegraph, we were at the front row of the press box, and when I was at the Times, we were at the back row of the press box. And some of the challenges that used to go in those derby games, I thought, I'm glad I'm even further from the pitch. In fact, the press, I played in a game once with Peter Beardsley. We had a press game at Goodison once, a few years back. And I played up front with Peter Beardsley, which is obviously a huge privilege for me, not for him. And just actually being on the pitch, obviously with an empty stadium. I mean, you'd have played in those games.
Yeah.
It was like a sponsors or a charity game at the end of the season. And it's just sort of iconic. Yeah, and it's one of those games where you obviously want to focus on the game because, you need to work on your seventh touch, let alone your first. And it's just the atmosphere of the place. I mean, there is whether there's a church next door, whether it was just the memories of the place, whether it's the quality of the singing or the intensity of the congregation, there's something almost religious about the place. And I know it's a religion to Everton fans.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned obviously St. Luke's in terms of it being a different kind of experience. When you were on the pitch, Henry, was it a different sort of vantage point? See, you're used to seeing it from the press box. Did the ground seem different from actually being in that position? Obviously, I guess the pitch may seem bigger when you're actually out on it.
I think it's psychological. I think if you are playing and you are in front of Gladys Street, even if it's empty, this is Gladys Street. There's something very special and privileged about that. And I was very aware I was privileged to play there. Quite small backstage. I mean, it's a little bit
in the tunnel, yeah.
In the tunnel, I could see why I got a bit lively in the tunnel. So I mean, I'm afraid there've been a few low points at the stadium, and having me on the pitch is definitely the nadir. But yeah, it was a privilege to be on there.
Yeah. So, which other games have you got on your list? Then, what have you got there?
Well, obviously Manchester United in town, that was always lively. There was a game in 2010. I checked this because I can remember Wayne Rooney. Obviously, Wayne returning to Goodison was always lively. And I think Sir Alex Ferguson held him back for that game. I don't know whether there'd been something on the front page or whatever, but or whether it was going to be a particularly toxic is probably the wrong expression, but a particularly lively reception for Wayne, who, I mean, my understanding of Wayne is that he can cope with most things. Thrown at him. Anyway, I mean, I covered the game, and United went 3-1 up, and they looked like they were in complete charge. And then Everton, it was obviously a Moyes team, and they hit back, and I think it was Cahill and Arteta, and it was 3-3 in the end. And you just so there were two elements of that. And Rooney, Rooney wasn't injured because there was an England game either shortly before or afterwards, and he played in that and he started, so it wasn't an injury thing. It was Sir Alex, and that must have been the Goodison factor. It must have been Sir Alex thinking, what sort of reception is my star striker going to get? And they could have done with him 3-1 up. If you got Rooney in there, it would have been 4-1 up probably. But anyway, with Moyes, and look, I'm a huge admirer of David Moyes. Again, a bit like Duncan as a footballing man, and as a man, I think he's a man of courage, substance. I mean, I can remember a slight detour, but when he was at Manchester United, they had horrendous results in Europe. And we all gathered at Preston at Deepdale the next day because Sir Tom Finney had passed away. And there were about sort of 2 or 3 of us journalists who'd been covering Manchester United the night before. And Moyes was there, and he was incredibly dignified and civilised, even though the headlines were screaming rage at him. So I'm pleased to see that he's being properly, appreciated. I mean, he always was and is at Goodison, but I think he's been one of the finest managers in terms of overachievement with some of the cards that have been dealt over the years. So it's great to see it. And, what a fitting manager to take Everton into a new era.
Yeah, that's if we take a slight detour there, Henry. If you brought David Moyes up there, the fact that Everton were only a point above the relegation zone when he came back in January, and a lot of people have been quite rightly so. A lot of praise for the work Sean Dyche had done this at Everton, more so before this current season, but obviously keeping them up the previous 2 years. But if you look at where they are now, I mean, obviously still a long way off in terms of positions, but in points wise, actually closer to the Champions League qualification positions than they are to the bottom three. I don't imagine even David could have imagined he'd have a turnaround as quick and as emphatic as that.
See, I'm slightly biased on this because I always thought Everton would be fine because I'm a big admirer of Jordan Pickford. I think he's up with the world's best goalkeepers. You can argue a little bit maybe about his distribution, but his shot stopping, his leadership. I mean, I've seen him take a penalty for England, let alone save one. That he's got minerals, as they say, and he's a leader in terms of his personality. I covered England, was covering you, but their last tournament, and I would get there early in Germany for the last Euros for training, and the goalkeepers, obviously the three goalkeepers, would go out early, about 15 minutes before the outfield players came out, and we could sort of go in and watch them train. Jordan Pickford in training is unbelievable. I mean, you know what he's like on match day, but he trains like he plays. He's throwing himself around, he's screaming at the ball. His language is a bit lively. He's taught me a few new words, but he's absolute commitment. And he's got the goalkeeping coach pinging, half volleys in at him. And he's going down, he's blocking them, and then he's getting up to save the rebound. He's doing that on quite hard pitches, day after day. We see, people talk about, he made sort of 6 good saves in the derby or whichever game it is, but you don't actually appreciate he's probably made 200 of those in the build-up to the game in training. It's remarkable the sort of the bruising he puts his body through. So absolutely him. I like Tarkowski. I just think he's a very reliable centre half. Jared Branthwaite as well. I mean, he's an absolute huge gem. But your club that's always had some fabulous centre halves down the years, ball playing centre halves, as well as sort of the old school just sort of headed away. I think they're a great combination, and I think David's just sort of tweaked it, and his man management is fantastic. I mean, he's got Beto scoring. Beto's had a decent run. He's believed in him. You just need Dominic Calvert-Lewin fit. So yeah, I'm pleased for David. He's one of the good guys.
Yeah. So in terms of your list, how many have we got to go now? In terms of
right, another one. 2016. Yeah. Talking of defenders who could play in midfield. I mean, I've always liked Ronald Koeman. I just like his character. He's actually a very funny guy. And I remember the 2016 Everton 2, Arsenal 1.
Okay.
And to be honest, I chose it because Ashley Williams, who I always liked and always enjoyed interviewing, I think he got the winner. But Seamus Coleman got the first goal. And I just think there's something, when I think of Everton and Gladys Street and the whole culture of Everton, I think of Seamus Coleman. And not simply because you got him for, 60 grand?
Yeah, it was 60 grand fee.
Famous 60 grand, the best 60 grand spent ever in English football. But I just think that he's just got principles. Whenever you hear him talk, whenever you see him play, there's just something about him. You think, I want him to represent me. And I think of someone who obviously writes broadly about football. If you want someone to defend the sport or a role model to defend the sport and actually sort of write about, you pick Seamus Coleman because of his substance as an individual. And I mean, again, your amazing community work. Probably only Arsenal can rival you for the oldest community operations and the best community operations. It's incredible what you're doing, and Seamus is invariably involved in that, and look, all your players are, but Seamus sort of sets the tone. So I picked out that game in 2016 because I just thought that he got the sort of fight back going. I mean, against a very good Arsenal, or pretty good Arsenal team then. And just one other, if I may, was October 2005, Everton won, Chelsea won. And a few reasons for mentioning this. First, because it was Mourinho in full pomp. Chelsea were all conquering. Lampard played really well. I remember David Moyes talking afterwards and said what he liked about Lampard was obviously, the goal threat, and he scored, but also when you got a star like that with his work ethic, he said he was fantastic. But I think James Beattie as well. I've always liked James Beattie. I ghosted his column for a while at the Telegraph, and he was brilliant to talk to. I almost hoped that actually he wasn't going to be in and answer the phone when I rang, because his answer phone message was always a Disney character, which I think he impersonated himself. So you think I've got through to sort of Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck or whatever, and it will be James saying leave a message. And he was great. I mean, James, very, very interesting character as well as a good player. Probably didn't quite deliver as much as he could have done at Goodison, but certainly in that game, he got a penalty really well. And he spoke to us afterwards, and he's always good value on and off the pitch.
Yeah. So in terms of, like we said, there's just the 5 games left now, but as you've already just alluded to there, Henry, in terms of the community work, the Everton community, and I know it's something you've spoken about a lot over the years, the fact that Everton are moving 2 miles up the road to the Mersey waterfront in Vauxhall, the Bramley Moordock site, but the club will retain a community presence. It's still not concrete in terms of what's going to actually happen with Goodison Park, but there's going to be the Goodison Park Legacy Project, and that's a big thing to maintain that presence in that part of Liverpool.
And it's completely to be expected, because you're very much, the people's club, the community club. I mean, I've talked to people at the community club and sort of sat in there and just looked at all the awards in that cabinet at the top of the stairs that, they put there quite modestly, actually, but it's remarkable the amount of awards that they've won. And basically you get into the club, and the community operation gets into parts of society, community, which the state government can't. I mean, I can remember that I was there once having a coffee with someone. Is it the Blue Hub, the one that's got the
yes, of course,
next to it?
Yeah.
I was in there seeing someone in the Blue Hub, and someone had just arrived. I don't think they were homeless, but they were really, really in a difficult way, and they were Scottish, and they said that they'd literally come from Glasgow because they'd been told that Everton would help. And that is the sort of the power of the Bags. That is the power of the sort of the community. And that's fact. That is the sort of type of impact that Everton make on so many levels. I mean, the surrounding area. I mean, it's in the 4th or 5th most disadvantaged in the country. It's an area that needs help, and it's crazy that we're in the 21st century and one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and we have issues. But clubs like Everton and an amazing community department with so many people working so hard, volunteers and everyone, and the players contributing and staff, you catch the people who fall through the cracks in society, whether it's on physical health, mental health, issues like obesity, knife crime, drugs, county lines, all those issues, many, many more. The amount of initiatives and campaigns I vote on the EFL community panel, and it's incredible the work that goes on. And they always, in fact, I mentioned it the other day when I was talking to the EFL, when John Stones, who obviously done amazing community work at Barnsley, when he went to Everton, I think he was PFA community champion there because of the nature of John Stones and because of the incredible nature of the work that Everton do. So, I mean, a club is all about winning, and it's all about camaraderie and togetherness, and I get all that, but it's also about supporting the community. And Everton showed that during COVID, showed that in the preceding 100 odd years before COVID, and in the 5 years since. And I think, to your point, I think just because of the fact that the stadium has moved 2 miles away, I don't think Everton's heart moves away from the community and the understanding and the desire to help those disadvantaged in the community.
Yeah, and just finally, obviously everyone thinks their club is special, but in terms of Goodison Park being a unique venue, you've alluded to already, the fact that they've got the church in the corner, but as I've already said myself, the first purpose-built football ground in England. It's staged the most top-flight matches of any ground. The World Cup games, 2 FA Cup finals as well. I think there was women's record club crowd, an attendance record that stood for 98 years as well. There's numerous sort of firsts and things like that. When it comes to that final day, you've seen it with Highbury and other new grounds for clubs. It's going to be an end of an era, not just for Everton, but for English football and I guess football around the world. It'll be a massive event when that Everton Southampton game comes in May.
It will, but actually Southampton's, it's poignant. I mean, I can remember one of the great joys of going to Goodison Park, as well as all the things we've mentioned, all the memories and all the amazing people there, that, the fantastic staff who sort of greet you and guide you, because I always get lost going up to the press box. I always turn the wrong way. And, but you go into the press room, you see that amazing picture of Alan Ball. And I love that because, I mean, what a player he was. I was privileged to interview him a couple of times. Just an amazing man. And that kind of sets the tone. I mean, for me, he was the best player in the World Cup final of '66. If you watch the tape back, Ball's contribution in the, not simply setting up the third goal, but the just his non-stop running. So look, clubs are about people. They're about Alan Ball. They're about the fans on the Gladys Street. They're the fact that it's the staff helping you when I get lost there. It's the kids outside on non-match days going past on their bike and having a kickabout. Clubs are about people, and you are the people's club.
So much, Henry, and as much as you've been a welcome visitor at Goodison over the years, I'm sure you'll be a welcome visitor to the new Everton Stadium.
I look forward to it and go and make some memories there, because that's what the game's about.
Cheers, Henry. That's terrific. Thank you.